Continuation of my last video. Institution topics was what I had started in my second last video, and this is the third part of that. In last video of mine, I had discussed institutions related to transparency and accountability, and here I'm discussing some institutions related to judiciary and some institutions mostly quasi-judicial bodies, and some institutions are related to the idea of media and media regulation. The question which I have raised today is, are there some blind spots which UPSC aspirants in general have in their prelims preparation? I'll be answering this question at the end. Now, looking at the subtopics, what are the issues I'm going to deal with? 3 institutions I'm going to deal with. One is tribunals, second is Press Council of India, third is Prasar Bharati. Why only these institutions? Because there is some important news related to these topics. And before moving into any particular issue, I'll be discussing, or I'll be introducing you to the news first, then I'll be looking at what are the issues you should be knowing for prelims. Hello everyone, welcome to Manifest IAS. You're watching Current Jots. This is Manjunath, Polity Faculty at Manifest. Current Jots is a current affairs initiative which we started on April 1st, and as part of this initiative we'll be covering all significant current events that have transpired since June last year. Along with the videos, we're providing free PDFs of these videos, the links of which are posted in the comment in the description section. And for the timestamping of these videos, please see the description. So in this particular video, as a continuation of my last video, institution topics was what I had started in my second last video, and this is the third part of that. In last video of mine, I had discussed institutions related to transparency and accountability, and here I'm discussing some institutions related to judiciary and some institutions mostly quasi-judicial bodies, and some institutions are related to the idea of media and media regulation. Before looking at the subtopics, the most unique component of this program, that is strategy talk, wherein I raise certain questions with generic questions which might boggle the minds of UPSC aspirants while preparation, because it is not just studying, the method of study is also particularly important. Keeping that in mind, the question which I have raised today is, are there some blind spots which UPSC aspirants in general have in their prelims preparation? I'll be answering this question at the end. If you too have any specific queries regarding your preparation, please feel free to put out your queries in the comment section. Also, if you feel that you need a customized reply, you can write to me. My mail ID is manjunath.manifestias@gmail.com. Now, looking at the subtopics, what are the issues I'm going to deal with? 3 institutions I'm going to deal with. One is tribunals, second is Press Council of India, third is Prasar Bharati. Why only these institutions? Because there is some important news related to these topics. And before moving into any particular issue, I'll be discussing, or I'll be introducing you to the news first, then I'll be looking at what are the issues you should be knowing for prelims.
Subscribe now and press the bell icon. Never miss an update.
So first is tribunals. Now, why were tribunals in news? Tribunals were in news for the judgment given by Supreme Court in Roger Matthew case in 2017, and as a result new rules were framed, and those new rules which are framed in 2020, those are also violative of Supreme Court order. That is one thing. And excessive tribunalization has been a cause of concern in recent times, and tribunals thus become important. More importantly, I did mention about tribunals also. Certain governments, state governments, are hijacking the authority of the judiciary, particularly UP state government, UP government recently, in the issues related to protesting and putting their pictures on hoardings in order to recover the damages, was violative of certain judicial principles outlined by the judiciary. And when judiciary High Court gave a ruling against, which did not go well with the government framed certain rules to establish tribunals and to sideline the judiciary. In all those contexts, in all these issues, the idea of tribunals becomes important. Now, what is a tribunal? When you look at the entire topic, tribunal is these are meant for functional specialized. These work on the principle of functional specialization, meaning that is they are meant for a specific sector only. For example, National Green Tribunal meant for environment. Then there is Cyber Appellate Tribunal meant for cyber security. Then you have Telecom Appellate Tribunal. There you have only it works specifically to telecom services. So they work on the idea of functional specialization, and they are quasi-judicial institutions. What does the word quasi-judicial mean? That we'll be discussing in the further slides, wherein I'll be discussing the governing principles of tribunals. Now, tribunals are, mind you, they are not constitutional bodies. They are mentioned in the constitution. There is a difference between mentioning in the constitution and being constitutional bodies. When you say something is a constitutional body, it means that in the constitution, in the article, it is written that the executive will form the body time and again. I mean, at regular intervals, maybe 5 years, etc. For example, Finance Commission is a constitutional body. Article 280 says the executive constitutes. But with respect to tribunals are mentioned in Article 323A, 323B, but it says that Parliament can make laws to establish tribunals. So, when Parliament makes laws, CAT is a law made, Central Administrative Tribunal Act 1985. Under that, tribunals have been constituted. So, tribunals are statutory bodies. Particularly the administrative tribunals and others. Even if you look at NGT also, it's a statutory body. They have a constitutional basis, but calling them constitutional bodies is incorrect. They are meant for adjudication of certain disputes determining rights between contesting parties. The parties could be a public servant in case of an administrative tribunal. In case of a green tribunal, it could be parties, environmental activists, anything could be the possibility depending on the sector. Now, I told you they have a constitutional basis under Article 323A, 323B, and this was included by a separate amendment, 42nd Amendment 1976. And also this question was asked, CAT, one of the older question papers in UPSC, that Central Administrative Tribunal was constituted under Lal Bahadur Shastri. It is incorrect statement. It was constituted in 85. After a long time after Lal Bahadur Shastri. So these questions are historical perspectives, which I've talked about at length in various videos. Also, I have discussed this at length in my strategy video, about wherein I've discussed 8 patterns of questions. For that video, you can visit the channel. Next is with respect to tribunals. What are the things you should be knowing? Constitutional provisions you should be knowing. 323 and 323B are the constitutional provisions. 323A talks about administrative tribunals. 323B talks about formation of tribunals for other issues. It could be, there are 8 issues given. It is there in Lakshmikant. You can just see taxation, foreign exchange, etc. Now, the difference between 323 and 323B also given Lakshmikant, just I'm highlighting for your purpose. 323A, there could be a gradation of tribunals, and it is only center which can establish tribunals at 323, and 323B, center can establish, state can establish. So there is no gradation or hierarchy of courts or hierarchy of tribunals. Here there is a hierarchy of tribunals in 323A. Also, there is a mention of tribunals in Article 262. Article 262 gives the authority to the Parliament to make a law for adjudication of interstate disputes. As a result, so Parliament has passed an act called Interstate Water Disputes Act 1956. Under that act, it gets the authority to adjudicate on those disputes. Under that act, it gets the authority to establish a tribunal. Central government gets the authority to establish a tribunal. So tribunal related articles are these many. Now, when I say tribunal is a constitutional body, etc., I'm somewhere hinting at the governing principles of tribunal. So what are the governing principles? When I say quasi-judicial means it is quasi-judicial at various levels. It is quasi-judicial in its composition. So when I say quasi-judicial in composition means what? It is not purely composed of judges. It also has expert members. So when I say expert members, what does it mean? Expert members depends on the sector it is working in. In case of NGT, it is environmental experts will be its members. In case of cyber appellate tribunal, cyber security experts will be its members. So depending on and also in case of CET, administrative tribunal, administrators are part of the NGT along with judicial members. Hence, it is a quasi-judicial body. And also it is quasi-judicial, meaning it is not strictly bound by in its powers as well. It is not strictly bound by Civil Procedure Code 1908. It works on the principle of natural justice. That is, its powers are wider. Principles of natural justice wide broadly includes two things. That is, one cannot be a judge in one's case, and one has a right to defend. These are the two general principles of natural justice. Next is, also remember that the judgments given by the tribunals are not called judgments like courts. They are called awards. So this is what differentiates them from normal courts. I'll give you more or detailed points differentiating tribunals and courts in the next slide. Also, there is a rule in Chandrakumar case which says that the tribunal's decisions should be challenged first in the High Court and then come to the Supreme Court. Now, this we have also studied in foreigners tribunals, wherein I said that foreigners tribunals awards can be challenged in High Court. So also a point you have to remember is tribunals, though it got a constitutional basis in 1970s, when you study governance in India, those post-liberalization era, there are many effects of liberalization. There is LPG. One of the effects is excessive tribunalization, because after LPG, many new sectors come up and state is divesting its powers. Many sectors are going into the hands of private. For example, spectrum was just being allocated by the center. Many new telecom operators were entering the fray. So as a result, there was a need to regulate them. Hence, tribunals came handy. TRAI was a body which was established, and under that there was appellate authority. Then cyber issues came up after LPG. That also could be established. So tribunalization was an outcome, or it was hastened by LPG. As a result, today you see that there are around 27 tribunals working in different sectors, and a new bill has been initiated to consolidate them into 19. How right, etc. it is, that we'll be looking into later slides. Next is difference between court of law and tribunal. Now, court is a part of traditional justice system. It is tribunal, on the other hand, is an agency created by a statute and invested with judicial powers. Civil courts have the power to try all civil suits, but tribunals have specific cases only. For example, NGT deals with environmental cases only. So there it has a restricted power. Judges of courts are independent of the executive. Here terms, conditions, etc. are determined by the executive. That we'll be discussing how and why. The presiding officer here is trained in law. He may or may not be trained in law because it is composed of both judicial and expert members. Next is the judge should be impartial and not interested in the subject matter. Here sometimes the tribunal may be a party to the dispute also. And also, courts of laws are bound by all rules of procedures and evidence. Here they are bound by principles of natural justice, which I did make a mention. Court adjudicate on laws. They can declare a law as null and void. They can decide virus. Whereas tribunals don't have that authority. They deal with disputes according to a law, according to principles of natural justice. They do not have the authority to examine the constitutionalities of laws, etc. Generally, that is avoided. So this is the limitation, or this is the difference between the normal court system and tribunals. And I also told you it's part of that LPG framework wherein specialization became important and tribunals got established. Now, why was it in news? Recently, it was in news because financial rules which were framed, rules related to tribunals which were framed in 2017, those were declared unconstitutional in Roger Matthew case. And also, so in the case, Supreme Court said that new rules have to be framed. So when new rules have been framed in 2020, they are also violative in nature. They constitute a contempt of court. That is why this issue becomes important. Now, what is this entire issue related to? We'll be discussing in detail. Section 184 of Finance Act. Finance Act is the part of the budget wherein it has to be passed within 75 days. It is a written rule. This constitutes the income part. If Appropriation Act constitutes the expenditure part, Finance Act constitutes the income part. How will the money be raised, etc. Now, recently there has been a trend, and also remember that Finance Act is a money bill. Hence, Rajya Sabha has no saying in it. So, in recent times, there has been a procedural violation. Many bills have been passed as money bills, which have no connection by any stretch of imagination with money bill. So this is to exercise brute majority. This is to disregard Rajya Sabha, because when the present government, until very recently and even now, doesn't have majority in Rajya Sabha, where it feels that Rajya Sabha could obstruct its laws, etc. So it is hijacking in a different fashion. It is hijacking the powers of Rajya Sabha by claiming certain bills as money bill. Now, one such bill was under Finance Act, under Section 184. It was clandestinely pushing the clause, clandestinely pushing the clause which was altering the appointment system, determining terms, salaries, allowances of the tribunals. So technically, if you see, tribunals should not constitute part of Finance Act, nor does it by any stretch of imagination be part of money bill, but it was passed, and by this the Ministry of Finance, under that there is a department. The department was given authority to frame rules for all tribunals, that is all 27 tribunals, which are now being consolidated to 19. So Section 184 of this act gives central government wide-ranging powers for appointment of members to 19 tribunals by amending 19 existing laws in a single stroke. Now, it was passed as a money bill. It does not require the approval of Rajya Sabha. Hence, it was violating the federal principles, and hence it was open to. It was bound to be read down and declared invalid by the Supreme Court. Under Finance Act, what it was trying to do, so it gave powers to, when I said it is giving powers to central government, who is it giving powers to? It is giving powers to Department of Revenue under Ministry of Finance, which will frame rules. And this framed rules in 2017. It notified certain rules, Tribunal, Appellate Tribunal, and other authorities rules 2017. And these rules dealt with everything: term of office, of retirement age, composition, search cum selection committee, qualifications, etc. of all tribunals. That is 19 tribunals. Earlier there were 27. By the same law, they are now being consolidated into 19. What are the issues with these rules? First issue with the entire law and rule was it ignored Rajya Sabha. That was one thing. Second thing is it is consolidating 27 tribunals into 19. So it is undercutting or undermining the very fundamental principle of tribunals. I told you tribunals are meant for functional specialization. They have technical expertise. So if cybersecurity appellate tribunal is constituted, it is meant for that particular sector. So when you decrease the number from 27 to 19, you are undercutting the principle of technical expertise, because because cyber appellate tribunal in any case cannot work in NGT, nor NGT can work in cyber appellate tribunal. So when you reduce the number, it is going against the principle of technical expertise and functional specialization. And more importantly, it was hijacking not only the powers of parliament here, it was hijacking the powers of judiciary as well. How? All search cum selection committees, if you see, those who are involved, the search and selection committees involved in appointment of members of the tribunal, there is a principle that judiciary should enjoy a majority. This is a judgment given in a specific case. It is called R. Gandhi versus Madras Bar Association 2010. Under that, it was clearly written or clearly ruled that judiciary should be playing a dominant role in appointment. Here what has been done, it has completely hijacked the judicial control. It has sought to extend its executive control over everything from salary, from appointment to salary to determining the term. The search cum selection committee now has government members in majority. So barring NCLAT, the selection committee of NCLAT, all other tribunals, that is 18 tribunals selection committee has three secretaries and one judge. Only in case of NCLAT, there are 2 judges and 2 secretaries. So when there are 3 secretaries are part of the executive. Executive will have it will have a better say in terms of appointment, and this compromises with the neutrality of tribunals, because tribunals adjudicate on many issues where executive is a litigant itself. So this creates an issue of conflict of interest, and hence it was declared invalid by the Supreme Court. So let us look at the case. The case, that is Roger Matthew case, in that case it said the Finance Act and also the rules framed under the Finance Act are completely invalid, and it says that new rules should be framed within 6 months, and it also refers the question of Finance Act being passed as a money bill to a larger bench. So if you go to the particularities of the judgment, it says within 6 months a new rule should come up. And what is the reasoning does it give with respect to declaring it invalid? It says that it violates its judgment, R. Gandhi versus Union of India case, where it said that tribunals or institutions should enjoy independence from the executive. This can be used in your criticism against RTI amendments also, because RTI is also an independent institution. So it says that it is violative of this judgment, and when the executive is getting the complete authority to make rules, etc., it is bound to create conflict of interest. So it shall ensure that rules are made in a non-discriminatory and uniform conditions of service should be included with an assured tenure, is what it said, because assured tenure and security of service conditions will help in promoting independence. Now, how was independence compromised? I told you, composition violates. Instead, 3 members belong to the executive, 1 is judiciary, and it also talks about the tenure as well. It says that tenure is, under the rules in 2017 rules, tenure is being fixed at 3 years. In Madras Bar Association, it had said that 5 to 7 years should be the minimum tenure, because it is impossible to acquire technical training. It is impossible to acquire the technical capacity within 3 years. So tribunals should be considered as training forums for building technical capacity. So it can happen only between 5. Hence the tenure should be fixed between 5 and 7 years, is what it said. So finally, it said it is declared invalid, and it also gives, as a supporting argument, it gives Law Commission's report 272, where it says that independence of tribunals is important. Next is, it goes further and also gives a judgment saying that the entire appointment and oversight mechanism should follow a model which should follow the UK model. Under UK model, what is the model of appointment? In UK, there is a regular cadre for appointment of tribunals. A regular cadre is created from where they are selected. So Supreme Court has asked a 3-member committee to look at that model and see whether it can be followed in India. And it also talks about setting up of an autonomous oversight body for monitoring all tribunals. There is whatever 19 tribunals are existing. There should be one independent body, just like High Court has administrative supervisory functions over subordinate. So similarly, one's body should be established for oversight of all the tribunals. So this is the judgment it gives. Other observations it makes is that not taking the law to Rajya Sabha in itself violates federal principles, and it says that Rajya Sabha reflects the plurality of nation and balance of power. And finally, it says that Union Ministry of Law and Justice should conduct a judicial impact assessment of this act. So what is judicial impact assessment? That becomes important. You might have heard terms like social impact assessment that comes under LARR. You might have heard environmental impact assessment. And there was through a notification, environmental impact assessment notification 1994 later on made into a specific act. Now environmental impact assessment, etc., those definitions, similar definition applies here as well. So whenever law is made, what are the financial implications of the law on the judiciary is called judicial impact assessment. For example, you frame Domestic Violence Act, then the number of litigations might increase, and it will increase the burden on the judiciary. So Supreme Court says that judicial impact assessment should be conducted even for this act to examine the impact on tribunals, and consequently the budget should be released for them. These are the observations it makes. But even after the observations, I've given you certain cases, Roger Matthew case and 2019 Madras Bar Association case. These are 2 most important cases which I have dealt with already. One deals with the independence and also tenure. Roger Matthew case we have discussed in detail. So despite the judgment, despite clear rules or guidelines being given by the Supreme Court, executive has had the it did not budge. It has shown it has been reckless in terms of reckless it's a recklessness showed deliberate recklessness or deliberate overruling of the orders. It has continued with the same rules. The new rules which have been framed, 2020 rules, those are those do not completely follow the rulings given by the Supreme Court. When I say those do not completely follow, what are the violative things which still exist? The majority of executive in the search and come selection committee still exists. Tenure issue still continues to exist. So what are the issues? Just we look into precisely. In 2020 rule, all committees, selection committees, will consist of a judge. So one person from the judiciary, president, chairman, chairperson of the tribunal. So the tribunal person of the tribunal, that is president of the tribunal, will also be the members of the search and selection committee. This is also violative of the judgment. Supreme Court judgment has said that member of a tribunal or president of a tribunal cannot be the member of the selection committee. It constitutes a conflict of interest. The second is two secretaries. So still we see that judge is, or judiciary has a lesser say, and the tenure is now increased from 3 to 4 years, still violative of Madras Bar Association, which had recommended 5 to 7 years. I've already explained these things, and in this, if you remember, I said that the president of the tribunal will be a member. Now, president of the tribunal will not always be a judicial member. In case is a non-judicial member, judiciary will again be reduced to a minority. And with respect to tenure also, I have in detail spoken about. So in short, all these constitute a amount to contempt of court. Now this has been a trend lately in the actions of the executive, which has been unflinching, which has violated the rules or judgments of the judiciary without batting an eyelid. And this somewhere shows that judiciary has somewhere been compromised in the recent times, and the appointment of judiciary or the judge in the appointment of CJ as the Rajya Sabha member is another. It's buttressing the fact that judiciary is no longer, or judiciary's position in India is slightly compromised. So irrespective of the political arguments and also the constitutional arguments, I think the idea of tribunals with respect to its governing principles, how does it function, constitutional basis, those are more important for prelims. And what I feel is this topic is very important with respect to the mains exam, where analytical questions are possible. But with respect to prelims, constitutional basis, the judgment, important points, those are the things you should be remembering. Next is PCI. The Press Council of India has also been in news, again for all the wrong reasons. One is Press Council of India as a body is a statutory body. It's a quasi-judicial body, and when its major function is to protect the independence and all independence of the press. And in an ironical decision, or in an ironical opinion, ironically, what it has done recently is that it supported the clampdown in Jammu and Kashmir. It said that freedom of press is not necessary at present in Jammu and Kashmir. So it was banned by Editorial Guild, and also recently it sent a show cause notice to Telegraph, when against an article written where the headline was it is not COVID but COVID did it. It is not COVID but COVID did it. It was a satirical piece on appointment of CJ as the Rajya Sabha member. So looking at all this, it's somewhere there is a feeling that PCI has the independence of PCI has been compromised. PCI is actually it needs to further the interest of the press. Now the analytical aspects etc. are more important for mains issues. From prelims point of view, what are the things you should be knowing? What is Press Council of India? Press Council of India is a quasi-judicial body, a statutory body established in the year 1966, but it was given a statutory position under Press Council Act 1978. It's a statutory body, quasi-judicial body, and two important functions it has. It adjudicates the complaints against the press, and also it adjudicates against complaints made by the press as well. Next is what is the composition? It is headed by a chairperson, and chairperson by convention is a retired judge of a Supreme Court. It is by convention. There is no strict rule. There is nothing written in the clause or in the article. In the act. Press Council Act 1978. It has 28 members. 20 members belong to the press. 5 members are from the 2 houses of parliament. 3 members are from cultural and literary fields, usually as nominees of Sahitya Academy or University Grants Commission and Bar Council of India. Next is their term of 3 years, and they can be they're eligible for renomination for not more than 1 term. So at max they can have 2 consecutive terms. And if you look at their funding, the fund comes from the revenue collected by it as a fee levied on registered newspapers distribution based on the circulation. And also the point which has to be noted is that no fee is levied on newspapers with circulation less than 5,000 copies, so that they will be able to sustain themselves. Now, if you look at the functions I told you, build a code of conduct, help newspapers in maintaining their independence, etc. These are the general functions. But what are the limitations with respect to their powers? First thing is, it does not have it. Many times it is described or it is criticized as a toothless body because it does not have any authority to impose or punish in case its guidelines are violated. So it has limited powers to enforce guidelines. It cannot penalize newspapers or news agencies, and also only newspapers or press comes under it. The print media is not under it. The print media has its, there are other corporation bodies like Advertising and Standards Council. There is also Prasar Bharati that we'll be discussing later. So these are the limitations. Now, what is Prasar Bharati? Why was it in news? Prasar Bharati was in news for 2 things. One is recently, when I say 2 news, one is the recent news, and the other, if you look at the contextual history of Prasar Bharati, it got the stature which it has today during the time of emergency, as a response to emergency rather. So Prasar Bharati was in news recently because there was a tussle between the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting Minister, Mrs. Smriti Irani, wherein the chairperson and the minister had a tussle. The rights of covering International Film Festival of India, where they were taken away from DD and then they were given to a private company, and it is alleged that the private company has members who are close to Smriti Irani since her days in cinema and since her days in television. And also, this is one allegation. Second thing is, and this created a kind of altercation and also a tiff between the chairman and chairperson and minister and the minister. Second thing was, it was also made a rule that DD should give a whopping 2 crore for that company in order to cover the IFFI. So originally these were the rights of DD, and also there was also allegations that there was a compromise in terms of selection of the members of Prasar Bharati as well. The selection of members in Prasar Bharati happens through a committee, a separate committee. So this was somehow managed through backroom channels, etc. That was the allegation made. And after all this, there was a face-off between the two, and Smriti, the minister threatened the Prasar Bharati of stopping salaries, because salaries are brought from, salaries are given by the ministry. Now, all these issues, when you look at the story, you need to know how Prasar Bharati functions, from the prelims point of view, what is the selection process and what is its historical aspects, because many articles were written, many editorials were written in the newspapers regarding this. Now, what is Prasar Bharati? Prasar Bharati is actually a corporation. It's a autonomous public broadcasting agency. It was set up in 1997. Now, the act was passed in 1990, Prasar Bharati Act, but it was established only in 1997, and under it, the Doordarshan Television Network and Ministry of Information and Broadcasting function. And what is its major primary function? Under the act, there are 2 major functions it talks about. It ensures that the broadcasting should be conducted in public service. It should help in gathering news, not propaganda. So by the act, it gets a statutory basis and it becomes independent. But the act has its own history. The act was did not exist till 1990. Prasar Bharati's functioning, or the functioning of DD rather than Prasar Bharati, the functioning of DD and also All India Radio was heavily compromised during post-emergency period. It was used for propaganda. It was hijacked by the then Information Broadcasting Ministry. The ministry, and later on, after the emergency, 1979 Information Broadcasting Ministry proposed a bill, and as a result the bill was formulated, but in 1990 it was established in 1997, giving a statutory framework. Now, what does the statutory framework talk about? It talks about its composition, its powers, etc. So in its composition it has chairman, and there are other members, there are ex officio members, then there are nominated and elected members. Now, what you have to remember is chairman and other members, except the ex officio, elected and nominated members, are appointed by the president. So when I say they are appointed by the president, it is not the prerogative of the executive. It is recommended by a committee. Now the government has no part in appointment. It is independent. But what did I mention in the story which I narrated prior to taking up this issue is there have been backroom channels through which 2 members have been nominated. So it still is not completely an independent body. So that is how its independence is being compromised. So the political aspects of it don't become important, but the selection process becomes important, which would crop up as a prelims question. Now finally, what is the stand on its autonomy today? When you look at it, though it has a statutory basis, etc., the budget of Prasar Bharati is still with the center. Now how does it come? Once the parliament approves the budget comes from the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting, and those are released on a monthly basis, and hence the salary can be paid to around 5,000 employees of Prasar Bharati. So this could be misused, and this has been misused recently, where Smriti Irani threatened of dire consequences, wherein she stopped the funds which are to be paid as salaries. So Prasar Bharati had to use this contingency fund in order to pay the employees. So this becomes a problematic aspect. So Supreme Court also in one of its verdict has said that it should be freed from state control. So there is a requirement of a rule to be made by legislature to ensure its independence. Despite being an act, it is not completely independent in terms of budget. So Supreme Court says that certain rules should be framed for its independence. Now, what are the functions? I mean, generally you can look at the functions. Basically, you have to remember that there are 2 bodies, and it aims to, these are very generic functions, highly unlikely that they can be asked, but you have to remember the organs or the networks which function, DD and AR. So whatever functions they generally perform, that is the idea. So they work for the unity and integrity as enshrined in the Constitution of India. This is the most important function which you have to remember. Now, with this we have known all the institutions, and this ends my 3-part series related to institutions. In case any smaller institutions here and there they are left, I'll be picking up it in governance aspects, wherein that will come later. So as part of this series, we also have promised you that we'll be giving you certain questions related to the topic. So here are the questions. 3 questions have asked related to the topic. And the first question is related to tribunal, second is related to Press Council of India, and third is related to Prasar Bharati. These questions are also posted in the comment section. Do answer them, because it is not just for your assessment of how much of the video you've understood, it's also for our assessment as to how the videos are being received. And based on this reception and assessment, we're also thinking of bringing a full-fledged test on current affairs once we finish a sizable chunk. Now coming to the last part, that is strategy talk. Are there some blind spots which UPSC aspirants in general have in their prelims preparation? Yes, there are. Now why did this question crop up in my mind? I'll give you a background to it. See, whenever you see that, I mean, if you see the level of toughness of question papers, it has become increasingly tough over years. If you look at 17, 18 and 19, 19 is tougher than 18, 18 has been tougher than 17. Now, so in this there is, the toughness level is increasing. That does not mean that, you cannot tackle it. The point of not tackling it comes up only when students miss wood for trees. That is, they go in for excessive research where it is not required. For example, certain questions in polity may be asked which are very, very tangential. Certain questions in history might be asked which are very, very tangential, like future Buddha, etc. and all. And when such questions are being asked, students get diverted from what they exactly have to do. They are in search of those one or two questions, and for that one or two questions, they add one more layer of book or a new book in their next attempt. So this is a wrong method to do, because rather than attempting those questions, it is advisable, it is wise to leave those questions, because whether those questions will ensure your entry into the exam or not, that I can't say. But once you do it wrongly, they will surely ensure, once you attempt and you go wrong, they will surely ensure your exit from the exam. So you have to be very wise in terms of what questions you're attempting. So that there's this question of, or this problem of not recognizing the correct questions to be attempted, comes from the problem of blind spots. Now, there are certain spots which are bright enough to be scored, which are easily fetchable, but still aspirants do not read them because they have not read the syllabus properly, or they have not been analyzing the pattern properly. And so what is the mistake they are committing? They are restricting themselves to prelim syllabus, and hence there are many blind spots. What are those blind spots? Society in paper 1, that is in mains, and international relations, and also you have governance aspects, and agriculture, and fifth is internal security. Now, all students have a misconception that these portions are particular for mains, but I have seen n number of questions being asked from society, particularly with respect to governance, and huge number of questions in agriculture. They're asking 7 to 8 questions every year. Internal security questions 2-3, and society 2-3 questions. In total, if you see, it constitutes a big chunk of 20 questions. So rather than going after such questions wherein you have to add a new book, and despite reading a new book, you still cannot figure out that, or you still cannot reach those questions, I would suggest UPSC aspirants to look at the questions, look at those sections where it is easily fetchable. So these are the easily fetchable sections: society, IR, governance, and if you look at IR institutions, you can easily guess, because only those institutions are picked up which are in current. So keeping all this in mind, these are the 4 sections I'll be coming up with, particularly society, IR institutions, internal security, and governance, and how to tackle them. I'll also be coming up with a strategy video on this, along with what kind of questions are being asked, and I'll be doing all the current events related to these aspects, particularly society, IR, governance, and internal security. Hope this video helped you. And if you have any specific queries regarding your preparation, you can write to me. My mail ID is manjuna.manifestis@gmail.com. Thank you. Have a great day.